trauma patterns. What are they? How do we get them? And most importantly, how do we train ourselves out of these patterns that no longer serve us into more serving patterns for us right now that can help us thrive? So, trauma patterns, there's four main trauma patterns I want to get into. But one thing I want to say is when we talk about trauma, we think oftentimes about big capital T trauma, abuse, neglect, whether that's from childhood experiences and through early adulthood into regular adulthood. And all of these things certainly play a huge, huge role in our brain, in these trauma patterns, in some of these things that come up that we'll talk about. But I also want to talk about lesser known or less common style trauma, little t trauma. And the example I always love to give is, if we look at the ACEs test, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences test, which is a test of childhood trauma, one of my favorite questions on there is, did you feel, and I'm paraphrasing this, but this is generally where this is going, is did you feel very included in your family? Did you have friends? Did you feel loved? Did you feel like you were just a part of this group? Or did you feel a little bit like an outsider, like a misfit? And maybe you didn't have like this really close group of friends where you felt like you really fit in, or maybe you didn't feel like you fit in with your family. And maybe they loved you and they were amazing, but maybe you just didn't quite fit in the same way. This is an example of lowercase t trauma where it's not that anyone was mean to you or hurt you, but it really impacts our brain and how our brain develops and certain patterns that develop from younger years. And this does not always have to be from childhood, but childhood does play a really big role here in trauma, in how our brain develops and the programs or automations that our brain has that impact, how we talk to ourselves, how we communicate with others, our relationships with ourselves and others, and how we respond to situations or react to situations, depending on the person here. So all of this plays a really big role here. And yes, childhood plays some of the most significant roles because our brain's not fully developed. Our brain's really not fully developed until approximately age 24 to 26. And so early childhood obviously plays a really big role because we're really learning all of the things and learning how to understand the world and through teenage years, but it also extends through early adulthood. And once again, adulthood trauma can absolutely change the way our brain thinks and can have a massive impact on us. But our brain is fully developed, and some of these patterns may not be quite as strong, but that is also not to discount these experiences at all. And especially if you've suffered, with some of these adult patterns for years and years, it can be just as hard as anyone with some of these experiences from childhood to change out of these patterns and to reprogram our brain into more serving patterns to us at this time, as opposed to just surviving in the moment. So when we think about trauma responses, we have four main ones that we think about. And the first two are the most commonly known, although the other two are just as important and super, super common. Fight or flight are these two big ones, and the other two are fawn and freeze. And these are big categories within themselves, and I'm going to briefly talk about these because I want to spend more time talking about how do we get out of these patterns and walking through some examples here with you. So when we think about flight, this is exactly what you would think about. Fleeing the situation, getting out of the situation, removing yourself from the situation. If you're in an uncomfortable situation socially, maybe you just leave. You're done. You peace out. Fight, obviously, you're fighting. This could be you respond naturally to situations with yelling, aggression. Maybe you get angry. That's the first thing that comes up for you. And these are instinctual patterns. These are not things that you are actively thinking about. This is just automatically how your body and your brain responds to situations that are not comfortable or bring up some stuff here for you. And I am going to go over some examples here, so don't worry. I'm going to go theoretical and then application will be right after this. So we have fight or flight. Freeze. Freeze is when you literally freeze. Maybe if you've ever experienced freeze, like you basically just can't move. You feel like you're frozen in time. It can be very hard to communicate. It can be hard to move your body. It can be hard to just like do anything or make a move, whether that's verbal or an actual physical movement. And fawn is where you tend to just kind of shut down and then want to remove yourself from the situation. Flight is more of an instinctual just get away. Fawning, usually we have some sort of shutting down, dissociation before we want to remove ourselves from the situation. So I'm going to give you a personal example here because I think this can be really helpful. And I'm going to walk you through how this pattern developed so you can get an idea, and then also how it's shown up in my life. And then certainly when we talk about reprogramming, I'll go over the reprogramming process and continue on with this example. So for me, I grew up with a single parent. She was an alcoholic. I didn't have any other siblings. It was just me and her for our immediate family. And if you've ever been around an alcoholic, you could probably guess some of the things that I experienced. But there was a lot of yelling, a lot of just, I never knew what to expect kind of thing, depending on whether she was drunk or sober, and in what kind of mood. That could vary a lot, and it could vary hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute, depending on what was going on here. So there was a lot of unpredictability in the parent figure, which causes a lot of trauma in the brain, and you tend to be very perceptive of people in your environments, so much so that you can become very hyper vigilant, or you can develop a people pleasing mentality or like a peacekeeper mentality, always trying to keep the peace because you learn how to read someone's reaction and emotions and their body language, and you immediately adapt and respond to try and keep the peace, whether you shut down, whether you engage in a certain way, whether you change that, and you're constantly changing that because you're constantly being aware of the environment and the emotions going on around you. It can also lead to just, for me, like I learned to just shut down because anything I would say would be wrong. So it was a lot of just like, keep quiet, very funny, shut down just as soon as I could remove myself from the situation, remove myself because I could never say anything right. Anytime I did say anything, it was always wrong, or I was in the wrong, even when I was definitely in the right, looking back as an adult. So these are some of the patterns that I developed. And so I was a very much a fawn, classic fawn, and a lot of issues with people pleasing, saying yes, overextending myself, having a hard time with boundaries, and having a really hard time dealing with conflict, arguments, even, several years ago, just the thought of bringing something up, whether that's personally or professionally, that maybe at some point could result in a conflict or an argument would be terrifying. And I would not bring it up. And you can imagine not the best when it comes to running your own business, when it comes to having a relationship, when it comes to having friendships, even, just being so careful with everything and really just like not saying anything, because there was just this constant fear, like crippling fear of anything leading to an argument or a disagreement or someone saying no to me. And so that played a really big role. And it certainly kept me from expressing my feelings fully and completely, my thoughts and opinions, from being vulnerable, from opening up to people, sharing my true self, especially with friends and family. And I'll say even like I have an amazing husband, but even with him, even though I knew he was a safe person, and anytime I brought up anything, there was never any yelling, there was never an argument, there was always like questioning to understand in a very peaceful way. But it was always, it was a me thing. It was just always a me, like just this crippling fear based on what I had experienced as a child, and a pattern that helped me survive my childhood, which is really important to understand. These patterns often help us just survive this situation that we were in. And once we're out of that situation, our brain doesn't quite understand that we are no longer in that situation, and it's okay to not be that way anymore, because it's so used to just trying to protect us. Our brain is trying so hard just to protect us, and it doesn't understand that we are no longer under that same threat, in that same situation, that same environment. And so our brain just, we constantly go through the same pattern, the same process of thinking, and our brain just trying to protect us. And this is, one of my favorite things, that, I mean, a lot of people say this is not just a me thing by any means, but what we did to survive is not the same thing that we need to do to thrive. And so this pattern helped me survive my childhood, which, thank goodness, and thank you to my brain and all of these patterns. But as an adult who was no longer in this situation, who did have safe people, and a safe person, and it's natural to bring up things that people may not agree with, which is totally fine. And there's very healthy ways to disagree, and even argue, and have discussions about things. And so one of the things that was really important for me when starting to do some really deep trauma work was change a lot of these patterns. And this one, I bring this pattern up because this one was one of the hardest for me to change. I've done a lot of work for a lot of years, and I've changed a lot of patterns, and I've made a lot of progress. But this people pleasing and this intense fear of conflict was one that was very, very, very hard for me to change, and reprogram. And I know, after working with so many people on nervous system regulation work and trauma work, that many people who fall into this category feel exactly the same way. So when we have these patterns, how do we change them? Now, here's the thing, talk therapy can be really valuable, but talk therapy looks at the logic part of the brain. And these trauma patterns aren't in the conscious logic center of our brain. They are in our subconscious patterns. Some of these patterns are held in our body. I would have the thought of bringing something up and having conflict, could make me physically ill, and I could have a physical reaction. With the freeze response, like, people physically cannot move anymore. With the fawn, like, I could feel myself shut down completely. And I just, like, the only thing I wanted to do was get out of this situation. And I would feel it deep inside my body. And this is very, very common because trauma is stored in the body. These emotions are held in the body. And then our subconscious has these underlying programs that run based on, once again, things that we needed to do to survive, but do not help us necessarily thrive in our current life. So there's a lot of ways to go about retraining these patterns: trauma therapy, EMDR, somatic experiencing, psychedelic assisted therapy, energy style work can be very useful. It is one of the main tools that I have used. But I really want to talk about today brain reprogramming or brain rewiring. And this is something I learned about quite a long time ago. And I had worked with multiple practitioners on how to do this. I incorporate it into some of my energy work, into affirmation work, into meditation, into all of my nervous system regulation work. And I would see small wins, but I never really put this all together until just a few years ago. And when I started putting this all together here and using some other advanced tools, to really solidify this work, this is when my life really started to change. This is when my business started to take off, and I built a multiple six-figure business. This is when I attracted an amazing team of people to help me with my business. I've run businesses in the past. I've run businesses myself. I've run businesses for other people. And right now I couldn't ask for a better team. And just the people that I've attracted into my business, from a team standpoint, incredible and out of this world, which is a rare gem, if you manage other people, if you have your own business. The relationship with my husband, so different, such a deeper connection, and a vulnerability and intimacy, it's emotional intimacy in particular, just a way different level. And we've built a very different relationship, that is obviously much better. And then also from a friendship standpoint, I've been able to attract in some amazing people in my life who are the most supportive from a business perspective, from a life perspective, from a healing perspective, and I am able to build very, very uh, deep relationships with these individuals, and I am very, very grateful for these relationships. And a lot of this is from the brain rewiring work that I have done, which has led to manifestation work, and being able to attract in the right things for me, and things that I've wanted. So when we think about brain rewiring, there's three big parts to this. Number one, we have to understand, what do we want? Do we want to change a specific pattern? Do we want to feel a specific way? For me, in my example, continuing on, I wanted to feel safe around conflict. And the active thought I thought was, I love conflict. I love expressing myself fully and completely, and I love when that leads to conflict. And this is a little bit extreme, but also this was a very hardly ingrained pattern in my brain. And so I wanted to go to that, I won't say extreme, but to that level of intensity with exactly what I wanted. Step number two is feeling a specific way. So how would that make me feel? How would the thought of loving conflict and enjoying conflict, how would that make me feel? Well, I wanted it to make me feel safe, as opposed to me shutting down and cringing and getting physically ill. I wanted it to make me feel safe, just to feel safe around conflict, to feel safe around fully expressing myself. And then step number three is remembering and reliving. Important. You have to really relive this moment of a time when you felt that way or a very similar way. So I went back to a time when I did feel safe. And I had a very specific memory that I remember. I was like, wow, I feel like very safe and very comforted in this moment. And that is the memory that I chose to go back to when doing this particular brain repatterning of this pattern in particular, brain rewiring work. And so going through this process. Now, if you just go through this process, you may or may not see success because there's some other things that need to be done. I'll say sometimes I did this work like once a day, several times a day, 5 or 6 times a day. Frequency certainly matters. I'm not saying you have to do this 5 or 6 times a day and like spend 15, 20 plus minutes doing this, but it's holding onto these emotions and keeping your nervous system in a place where you're continuously feeling this way. And there's a lot of ways to continuously raise your vibration. For me, a big one is music. Music just lights me up in the best of ways. For some people, it's dancing. I also love walks outside. Like I love just going outside. I love getting my feet in the ground, in the grass. I love just smelling the fresh air. It's also, for me, I have a dog that I absolutely love and adore, and is so sweet and so cute. And just snuggling with him and going down and spending some time with him. Also super helpful for my vibration and keeping that level of safety and comfort while working on this pattern. Hugely, hugely helpful. Talking to friends or family can also be hugely helpful, as long as that really lights you up. It makes you feel really, really good. So it's all about keeping your vibration up while also doing this repattering work. On the other hand, it's also limiting things that bring down your vibration. Now, there are certainly some limitations to this. We can't control all of our experiences, but we can largely, not 100%, largely control some of the interactions or things that we consume. So, for me, like I stopped listening or watching to anything that wasn't funny or heartwarming, because I didn't want to be put in a state where I could experience a lot of negativity that would bring me down, that would send me down a spiral, to send me down loops. I was trying to increase the amount of positive, funny, heartwarming things that I was experiencing. That for me, that also meant limiting social media, because that certainly could have taken me down some rabbit holes. I also changed a lot of the things that I was consuming on social media at that point in time, which I have largely continued, to make sure that my vibration was staying high and I was feeling this way. And that made such a big difference in changing this pattern and getting this pattern to really stick. Now, full disclosure, I am definitely past the majority of this pattern. That also does not mean that it doesn't pop up every once in a while where there's something I want to bring up and I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling the best about this. I'm feeling a little bit of nervousness or some hesitation. And it doesn't happen with everything, but it does happen every once in a while. And it's just my brain going back to the original programming. But I'm very conscious of it. I'm aware of it. And it's not an extreme reaction like it used to be, but I'm very aware of it. And then I make a conscious decision not to continue with this pattern and to change the way. And I do either another brain retraining exercise. I'll get into a better vibration in one of those ways that I just talked about. And this has helped me really, really break the vast majority of this cycle. This is not my instinctual reaction anymore. This is not my original programming. This is not the vast majority of my programming anymore. And this has been hugely, hugely helpful, once again, in all different parts of my life. Now, this can be really hard to do on your own. I have worked with, like I said, many people on this, and I've kind of put all of these things together myself. And because of that, I've developed a program to help other people learn how to do this and have support while going through this process. If you are interested in participating in this new program, it is going to be a 9-week program where we have educational materials every single week, plus live calls, plus we're going to do an energy session to help fuel and solidify some of this work. We will also be using the tool of microdosing to help accelerate and solidify a lot of this work as well. If you are interested in applying, the program is called Life Force Reignite. We're so excited. It is me and one of my close friends and other practitioners who is in the energy and trauma space. And together we will be facilitating this amazing, amazing program and this container. And so if you're interested in applying, you do have to apply before being accepted. We have some things we just need to look at to make sure we are the right people are coming into this program, and then it's going to be a really, really good fit. So you can apply down the link below. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to answer. But the first step, you can take a look at the link below, and that'll go over some more information, some more detailed information, a week-by-week breakdown, in addition to having the application link. So if you have questions, let us know. Otherwise, we hope to see you soon. And thank you so much for watching.